In this video, you'll meet Emily, a woman who, at 68, finally confronts the past that has haunted her since childhood. Imagine the moment she approaches her father, George Huntington, a titan of the Californian agriculture industry, and whispers, "Dad, do you remember me?" A phrase that silenced the room and froze time. Emily, a retired art teacher from Napa Valley, spent her life transforming memories into watercolors, each brushstroke carrying the pain and hope of a reunion. Prepare yourself for a journey where each discovery is a piece of an emotional puzzle, where the strength to forgive intertwines with the search for justice and reconciliation. Settle in and get ready for a story that will grip you until the end. And as you watch, don't forget to share where you're watching from in the comments. We want to know where this story is touching hearts. Also, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because that encourages ladies like Emily to open up and vent about something that happened in their past. If you have a story that haunts you, don't be afraid. Let it out here in the comments. Get that burden off your chest. Anyway, we're ready to listen, Mrs. Huntington.
Thank you so much for your words. Come closer. My story will definitely touch you. Well, I'm 68 years old, and these shaky hands can't hold the brushes as well as they used to. Do you mind listening to an old retired teacher tell a story? It's about time, that silent thief who steals everything from us, except memories, and even memories. Oh, how treacherous they can be. Sit here where the afternoon light hits the porch. I want you to see my face while I tell it. Sometimes it hurts to remember. Other times it saves me. Today, I need to share what I've kept inside for so long. I was born in Napa, California in 1957. I grew up with the smell of wine fermenting in the air and the sound of tourists chattering. In the streets, my mother, Linda Carter, was a seamstress at the local clothing factory, the big one that closed down in the 90s. Small, rough hands, always pricked with needles. Emily, she told me every night before bed, a woman needs to be like water. She finds her way, even when there are rocks in the way. We lived in a little yellow house on Oak Street. I grew up listening to the sound of her sewing machine like a lullaby. My grandmother, Teresa, lived with us, blind in one eye, face marked by deep wrinkles like furrows in dry earth. She guarded secrets like rare coins. I inherited her love of stories, her eye for detail. "Observe everything, girl," she repeated while braiding my unruly hair. "Because one day you'll need to remember. At school, I was the quiet girl, the one who drew in the corners of her notebooks. Why do you insist on this nonsense?" the teachers asked when they caught me scribbling instead of copying equations. But for me, the colors spoke louder than numbers. I remember one teacher, Mr. Johnson, who held up my drawing, a poppy in bloom, that I had made with worn-out colored pencils, and said, "This girl has eyes that see beyond." It was the first time I felt like maybe there was a place for me in this world. At home, silence was our dinner guest. My mother never talked about my father. The few times I mentioned the subject, her eyes would water and she'd change the subject. "Some stories aren't ours to tell," she'd say. My grandmother would just squeeze my hand under the table, a secret code between us. Over time, I learned to draw the emptiness, to paint the absences. In elementary school, the teacher asked us to draw our family, while other children filled the paper with figures holding hands. I drew a woman with black hair, a lady with glasses, and a girl. Next to them, a blank space, deliberately empty. "Who is this?" the teacher asked, pointing to the void. "That's my father," I replied. "But there's nothing here," she insisted. "Exactly," I said. The whole class laughed. At home, I cried, hidden behind the old oak tree in the backyard. At 12, I found a silk scarf in the back of my mother's drawer, the initials LC embroidered in one corner. When I asked whose it was, she snatched it out of my hands. "Some things should remain locked away, Emily," she said, with a firmness I had never seen before. I grew up in this world of silent and strong women. We learned to make a lot out of a little. My mother planted lettuce and tomatoes in the small garden. My grandmother made apple pies that she sold at the farmer's market on Sundays. I helped wash dishes at Mrs. Olson's boarding house after school. The money was counted penny by penny at night on the kitchen table, under the yellowed light of a cracked porcelain lamp. We weren't rich, but we had our pride, my mother always said. I grew up watching her refuse any help that smacked of charity. "A woman's gotta make it on her own in this world," she'd repeat, while I secretly dreamed of someone coming to rescue us. It was in my teens that I started recording everything in notebooks. The first one, navy blue, was a gift from my art teacher when I turned 15. "To keep the things that don't fit in your drawings," she said. I never stopped. Collages, stray phrases, dried flowers between the pages, newspaper clippings, a whole life stitched together with thread and glue. The absence of a father became as present as any real person. Sometimes, standing at the living room window, I'd watch men in suits walking down the street and wonder, could that be him? In my notebook, I drew imaginary faces faces, trying to find features that might be mine. When my mother died, I was 22. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But I knew it was from sadness, too. That day, something in me broke and, at the same time, hardened. I found a yellowed envelope under her mattress. Inside, an old photo of a young man, smiling next to a field of corn. On the back, just one name, August. I kept that photo for decades, like someone keeps a key without knowing what door it unlocks. August, a name, nothing more. I tried to investigate, of course. I asked my mother's friends, the old neighbors, even the priest at the church where she went on Sundays. They all looked away, changed the subject. There was a tacit agreement of silence that I couldn't break. Got my art degree at the State College and started teaching soon after. The classroom became my refuge. Among children and teenagers, I could be whoever I wanted. Mrs. Laura, the art teacher who taught about Van Gogh and Georgia O'Keeffe, who encouraged her students to express their feelings through color. No one asked about my past or about the absence that defined me. I married at 27 to Frank, a math teacher, a good, kind man who liked my cooking and tolerated my paintings scattered around the house. We had happy, genuine moments, but there was always a part of me that remained locked away, that little girl from childhood who still waited on the doorstep for someone who never came. Frank passed away 7 years later in a highway accident. We didn't have children. I went back to being just me, my notebooks, and my paints. The years passed like pages of a book that someone flips through absent-mindedly. I taught, retired, watched my hair darken with increasingly frequent dyes. My knee started to give out. Surgeries came. Age advanced without asking permission. Then, one morning in July 2022, it happened. I was flipping through the local newspaper while drinking my coffee. The same old ritual. On the cultural events page, a small news item announced a charity auction at the Chicago Art Institute. The photo showed an elegant, white-haired man raising a glass, August Silverwood, 85, a prominent real estate developer. The same smile from the yellowed photograph I kept. My hands trembled so much that I spilled coffee on the table. It was him. It had to be. The same eyes, the same strong jawline that I saw in my own reflection. For 3 days, I couldn't sleep. Sitting on the porch, with my blue notebook in my lap, I made a decision. I was going to that auction. I needed to see him up close, hear his voice, find out if he remembered a seamstress named Lucy. I sold 2 watercolors to buy a new dress. Simple but respectable. I took my cane out of the closet, the one I rarely used out of pride. I asked the neighbor to drive me to the Greyhound station. On the bus to Chicago, clutching my blue notebook against my chest like a shield, I rehearsed 1,000 times what I would say. But when I arrived at the gilded hall of the Institute, with its blinding lights and elegant people, all the rehearsed words evaporated. The icy air conditioning made my shoulders ache. The red carpet seemed endless. In the center of the hall, he was giving a speech, glass in hand. August Silverwood, my father. I crossed the space as if crossing 60 years of silence. When I got close, I touched his arm. A nearby microphone picked up my trembling words. Dad, do you remember me? Time seemed to freeze in that hall. The jazz music playing in the background stopped abruptly. August Silverwood turned to me with wide eyes, the glass still suspended in the air. For a moment, a single moment, I saw recognition. In his eyes, then only confusion. "Excuse me, madam, have we met?" he asked, his deep voice echoing through the microphone. Before I could answer, a man in a dark suit approached quickly. He was younger, perhaps in his 40s, with the same aquiline nose as August. "Dad, is everything all right?" he asked, giving me a hard look. Then turning to me, he said, "Ma'am, you're disturbing the speaker. Please leave. I'm Laura Miller, daughter of Lucy Evans," I stammered, my hands clutching my blue notebook so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I just need 5 minutes." The man subtly signaled to security. "My father doesn't know any Lucy. There must be some mistake." I was escorted out of the hall by 2 security guards, camera flashes popping in my face. As I was leaving, the man who had intercepted me, Gabriel Sterling I would later learn, pressed a napkin into my hand. "A lady asked me to give you this. Now please go, and don't come back." On the napkin, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Find Tina at Java Alley." I spent the night in a cheap motel near the Greyhound station, crying myself to sleep. The humiliation burned like fire. In the bathroom mirror, I stared at my aging face, the gray roots barely concealed by the cheap dye, the deep wrinkles around my eyes. What had I expected? That he would embrace me in front of everyone, begging forgiveness for decades of absence? In the following days, a silent ache settled within me, deeper than the arthritis in my knee, more persistent than the bursitis in my shoulder. It was an old, familiar pain that I had pushed to the back of my mind for years, the pain of rejection. Dragged myself back to Buffalo, leaning heavily on the cane that now seemed insufficient to support the weight of of my body and my disappointment. My neighbors, Mrs. Davis and Mr. Johnson, greeted me with chamomile tea and questions I avoided answering. In the weeks that followed, I sank into a darkness I hadn't known since the death of Frank. I stopped attending the knitting circle at the park, where I taught ladies even older than myself. The paintbrushes dried in the cans. The canvases remained blank. My blue notebook, a faithful companion for so many years, lay closed on the dresser. What was there to record besides rejection? At night, sitting on the porch with a cup of cold tea, I replayed those few seconds in the hall, the flicker of recognition I saw, or imagined I saw, in Arthur's eyes, the napkin with the mysterious message. Who was Tina? Why did she want to see me? Many times I picked up the phone to call the Arts Institute, but hung up before completing the call. Other times I scribbled letters to Arthur that I never had the courage to send. The words caught in my throat. The courage slipped through. My fingers like paint diluted in water. Fear imprisoned me in my own house, in my doubts, in my loneliness. I let the phone ring unanswered. I ignored the knocks on the door. Why insist on a truth that no one wanted to hear? It was Mrs. Davis who pulled me out of that stupor. One afternoon in August, she knocked on my door insistently until I gave in. Enough hiding, Laura. I don't recognize my friend anymore, she said, placing a bag of fruit on my table. There's a young woman from the local TV station who wants to talk to you. She says it's important. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet the reporter the next day. Julie King was her name. Young, curly hair pulled back in a loose bun, bright eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. She had heard about the incident at the auction and was investigating the Sterling family for a story. You're not the first to question his past, Julie explained, settling into my living room with surprising ease. Arthur Sterling built an empire on a lot of secrets. While I poured coffee into mismatched mugs, I told Julie my story. I showed her the old photo of Arthur, the silk scarf with my mother's initials. She listened attentively, making occasional notes without interrupting. My grandma's in a nursing home in Syracuse, she revealed when I finished. Advanced Alzheimer's. She worked her whole life in the house of a wealthy family in Rochester. She always said there were ghosts in that house, children who appeared and disappeared. That night, after Julie left, I reopened my blue notebook. I began to write, the words flowing like a dammed river that finally finds passage. I recorded every detail of the conversation, every possible connection. Something inside me was stirring, like the first sparks of a campfire. The next morning, I decided to look for Java Alley. I had nothing to lose. I took a bus to Rochester, my knee protesting with every bump in the road. The alley was a narrow lane in the old downtown, filled with small coffee shops and craft stores. The aroma of freshly baked bagels led me to a small wooden door with a faded sign, Tina's Coffee. The woman behind the counter must have been in her late 60s, her fair skin etched with time, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. When I mentioned my name, her blue eyes widened with recognition. Sarah, she whispered, taking my hands in hers. You have her eyes? Just like Eleanor. Betty had been the housekeeper at the Vanderbilt estate for over 30 years. She met my mother when she was hired to help prepare for the wedding of William's first wife. The affair between them lasted almost a year. Your father isn't a bad man, Betty said, pouring me a strong coffee in a thick mug. But his family, they have the power to make anyone disappear. When she found out she was pregnant, my mother was quietly let go. She received money to move away, a silence agreement. William promised to visit, said he would acknowledge the child as soon as he resolved the situation with his family. But the visits became less frequent until they stopped completely. He came to see you once when you were about 2, Betty revealed. Brought a little rocking horse. Your mother wouldn't let him in, said it was too late. Before I left, Betty mentioned she had donated boxes of old clothes to the sewing program at the community center. I included some things I kept from your mother. Go there, volunteer. It's a good start. I went home that night with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, a small light at the end of the tunnel, fragile as a candle flame, but enough to illuminate the next steps. Signing up as a volunteer at the community center wasn't easy. First, I had to pass a practical arts test. I dedicated entire nights painting, the smell of turpentine mixing with the sounds of the late-night subway train that ran from Queens to Manhattan. My fingers, already stiff from arthritis, ached from holding the brush for so long, but the physical pain was more bearable than the anguish of uncertainty. I got the spot. Twice a week, I helped with painting classes for seniors. I observed every person who passed through the linoleum hallways, looking for William's face. He never appeared. I learned from other volunteers that he rarely visited the center, despite being its largest benefactor. One afternoon, I wandered into the sewing room, my heart heart pounded when I found, among old fabrics, a silk scarf identical to the one my mother kept. Same embroidery, same initials, E.G. I sat on the floor, forgetting the pain in my knee, and cried silently. "Are you all right, ma'am?" A young man approached, tall, thin, wearing wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as David, the center's archivist. "This scarf," I stammered, "belonged to the same set that my mother had. David became my ally. At night, after everyone left, he allowed me access to the archive room. Among dusty reports, I discovered that William had stayed in a hotel 2 blocks from my apartment in Queens 3 years earlier. He was so close. The hurt I felt was like a dagger. Why didn't he ever come to see me? Why pretend I didn't exist? Maybe it wasn't entirely his decision," David suggested, as we organized old documents. The following week, the betrayal came from where I least expected it. Arriving at the community center, I saw my face plastered on a tabloid. "Con artist tries to extort businessman using false lineage," the headline screamed. The photo, taken on the day of the benefit gala, showed me being escorted out. Next to it, a doctored image of me receiving money from an anonymous man. Michael Vanderbilt had planted the slander. I felt the ground crumble beneath my feet when the center coordinator called me to her office. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Goldman, but we'll have to suspend your volunteer position. We can't be involved in scandals." I cried on the bus back to Queens, the stench of exhaust mixing with my tears. Arriving home, I found another unpleasant surprise. Tabloid reporters camped out on my doorstep. Curious neighbors watched from a distance. Someone had spray-painted "liar" on my fence. I locked myself inside. Blinds closed, phone off the hook. My refuge had become a prison. For days, I subsisted on crackers and tea. My blood pressure soared, causing dizziness. On one particularly bad night, when the chest pain became unbearable, it was Anthony who rescued me, taking me to the emergency room. At the hospital, among tubes and beeping machines, I received an unexpected visit from Jessica. She was outraged. "I know who's behind this," she said, holding my hand. "Michael. He found out I'm investigating the family's business dealings. I found irregularities in property transfers. Your father, Sarah, transferred the estate to a shell company in his youth to shield the assets, and your half-brother is afraid of losing everything." I realized then that I wasn't just fighting against time and oblivion. There were powerful forces determined to keep the past buried, no matter the cost. I left the hospital with a prescription for blood pressure meds and a decision made. I wouldn't back down anymore. If Gabriel wanted a war, he'd get a war. Not the war of the powerful, with expensive lawyers and bought headlines. My war would be silent, woven with the threads of persistence I inherited from my mom. My house in Fresno became unbearable. The reporters gave up after a few days, but the neighbors' stares remained. Whispers followed me at the grocery store, at the pharmacy. I felt like a stranger in the town where I'd spent my entire life. "Come stay with me in Bakersfield," offered Julia on the phone. "It's small, but I have a guest room. No one will look for you there." I accepted. I packed some clothes, my notebooks, brushes, and the faded photo of August. Mrs. Gable promised to take care of my plants for the first time in decades. I left my town with no return date. Julia's apartment was in a quiet neighborhood near the nursing home where her grandmother resided. It was cozy, full of books and plants. The walls covered with photographs told stories of a restless young woman, always in search of the truth. "My dad was absent too," Julia said one night as we shared a bottle of cheap wine. "War correspondent. He died overseas when I was 12. I never got over the little information I received about his death. An unlikely bond formed between us. Me, a retired teacher with aching knees. Her, a journalist at the beginning of her career, with fire in her eyes and a thirst for justice. Different generations united by the same quest. Answers. In Bakersfield, away from the accusing eyes, I rediscovered the pleasure of painting. I set up a small studio in the corner of Julia's living room. I started a new canvas, a vineyard at dusk, a man and a woman holding hands, a little girl between them. The family I never had. One afternoon, Julia came home from work excited. I got access to the parish archives in Napa. It's all digitized. The priest who accompanied the Silvera family for decades recorded everything, including confessions. She showed me a laptop. On the screen, an old crackling recording. August, 40 years younger, sobbed before a priest. I was afraid to love you the wrong way. The date coincided with my second birthday, the period when, according to Tina, he had tried to visit me. He suffered too, I murmured, touching the screen. David visited us on the weekend, bringing documents he had borrowed from the Institute, architectural plans, donation records. Among the papers, we found something surprising, a project for a new cultural center in Fresno, to be built on land donated by August Silvera. The working name, Lucia Gonsalves Institute. Your father didn't forget you, Laura, David said, squeezing my hand. He just doesn't know how to fix the past. That night, I poured my story into a new notebook, Emerald Green, which Julia gave me. I wrote not with anger or bitterness, but with the serenity of someone who is finally beginning to see the whole picture. A TV producer contacted me, offering participation in a sensationalist talk show. Lots of money involved. A great temptation for someone living on a meager pension. I reread in the notebook, me at 6, on the doorstep, waiting for the sound of gravel under tires. I left the offer blank and murmured to myself, time stole my childhood. It won't steal my forgiveness. Instead, I made a bold decision. I would send one of my notebooks to August, with an invitation to an exhibition I would organize in Fresno during the Dogwood Festival. Returning to Fresno was not easy. The stares persisted, some still filled with judgment. But I didn't care as much as before. My spine was straighter, despite the cane. The determination gave new strength to my tired legs. The old abandoned barn in the central square was transformed into the setting for our exhibition. I got permission from the city thanks to a former student who now worked in the culture department. David brought restoration friends from Los Angeles. Julia mobilized journalist colleagues. Even Mrs. Gable and other ladies from the quilting group helped, decorating the space with colorful fabrics. Each wall received a period of my life: childhood in sepia tones, adolescence in deep blues, maturity in greens and browns. The centerpiece, absence in white, a portrait of young August, with empty gaps painted with gesso, the incomplete face of a man who existed only partially in my life. I worked tirelessly, ignoring the aches in my joints. At night, I took hot baths to relieve the lower back pain, put compresses on my swollen hands, swallowed sleeping pills. The next morning, I started again. A week before the opening, I got the news. Mr. Harrison had confirmed his attendance. My heart leaped so high I needed to sit down. It was really happening. 2 days later, a bombshell. Michael filed a lawsuit, claiming misuse of likeness. The exhibit couldn't show any reference to Harrison Sterling. The lawyers were cold, efficient. The document seemed insurmountable. We're not giving up, insisted Sarah, who had taken out a second mortgage on her house to cover the legal costs. I have connections at the courthouse. While the legal battle raged, I worked on an alternative, a new centerpiece. This time, I painted my mother, young and beautiful, as in the photographs she kept, holding a silk scarf that billowed in the wind. On the horizon, the silhouette of a man walking away. Between them, a little girl, her back turned, watching them, both. On the eve of the opening, victory. The judge dismissed the injunction. The exhibit could proceed with all the original works. We later learned that Emily, an environmental activist cousin of Michael's, had discreetly intervened, revealing minutes to the company board proving that Michael had known of my existence for years. The Dogwood Festival coincided with the start of spring. The city was awash in white and pink blossoms. The scent of the flowers mingled with the fresh varnish of the canvases. We strung up fairy lights throughout the restored barn, creating an intimate, almost magical atmosphere. That morning, Mary showed up at the barn door, bringing a warm apple pie wrapped in parchment paper. "For good luck," she said, hugging me. "And there's more I need to tell you about the visits your father made without anyone knowing." Before she could explain, we were interrupted by the arrival of the first visitors: journalists, photographers, art enthusiasts. The news had spread. This wasn't just a local art exhibition. It was the culmination of a story many had been following. At 6 in the evening, already exhausted, I saw a black SUV park discreetly behind the barn. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized the tall, imposing figure of Harrison Sterling getting out without an entourage. He was wearing work boots, not dress shoes. He seemed more human that way. Our eyes met across the crowd. There was no more running from the truth that both united and separated us. It was time for a reckoning with the past. I walked slowly slowly towards Harrison, leaning on my cane. The guests parted, creating a silent corridor between us. He stood motionless, holding a felt hat in his hands. Up close, I could see every line on his face, the slight tremor in his fingers, the moist gleam in his eyes. "Thank you for the invitation," he said, his deep voice faltering slightly. "Thank you for coming," I replied. We didn't hug. There were no dramatic declarations, just that mutual recognition, laden with decades of absence. We walked through the exhibit together. I stopped before each painting, explaining the stories behind the images. He listened intently, as if trying to recover all the lost time in one go. "Your mother had eyes like that," he commented in front of a self-portrait of mine. Observant, as if they could see right through people. When we arrived at the canvas Blank Absence, Harrison stood in silence for long minutes, his shoulders slumped slightly. Finally, he turned to me. "It was never my intention to abandon her, Laura, my wife's family. They threatened to take my son away, destroy everything I'd built. I was a coward, and when I finally found the courage, your mother said it was too late. She was right. The words didn't completely alleviate the pain, but they created space for something new, understanding." After the exhibit, we sat on the back porch of the barn. The smell of damp earth heralded rain. In the distance, a harmonica played in the town square. We drank coffee from chipped enamel mugs Mary had brought. "That project, the Lucia Gonçalves Foundation," I mentioned. "Is it real?" "Yes," he confirmed. "I started planning it 5 years ago, when I learned you were still living in Greenville. I didn't know how to approach you." The next day, the newspapers reported on the success of the exhibition. A photo of us side by side, looking at the main canvas, became a symbol of reconciliation. Sarah received an offer to anchor a cultural program on a national network. David organized a traveling exhibit throughout upstate New York. The following week, I received a phone call. Blank Absence had been auctioned for a record amount. The anonymous buyer donated the work to the Greenville Municipal Museum. Michael visited his hospitalized mother, and according to what she later told me, confessed to keeping letters never sent to his father. "A Sterling doesn't show weakness," he always said. The revelation didn't absolve him, but it humanized his formerly monstrous figure in my eyes. John signed over a small ranch near Fresno to me, where an old farmhouse used to stand. "It belonged to your maternal grandmother," he explained. "Your mother never bothered to claim it." In the following weeks, I personally oversaw the renovations. For the Lucia Gonçalves Center, the first group of senior women inaugurated the space, wearing new smocks that smelled like lavender soap. Together, we read old letters and shared memories. During the ceremony, I felt my blood pressure rise, a ringing in my ears. My hands trembled. John held my wrist and called an ambulance. "Now it's my turn to wait for you," he said as they wheeled me to the hospital. Today, sitting on the porch of the ranch donated to the center, I watched the light rain paint the horizon lavender. I'm 68 years old with a lifetime of stories to tell. Time has stolen much from us, from him and me, but it has given us something precious in return. The truth. There are no more locked journals or secrets hidden in drawers. John comes to have coffee with me every Thursday. Our silences no longer sting like they used to. Sometimes he brings small gifts, flower seeds, old books, photographs he found. We've built a bridge across the chasm of lost years. It's not perfect, but it holds us. On the last page of my most recent journal, I wrote, "When the silence bloomed," because that's what happened. From the oppressive silence, flowers of understanding and forgiveness were born, and the wind that blows through the orchards seems to turn these pages, as if life itself wanted to revise our story.